you are parents, but watch very carefully what's going on, and then it speaks for itself.
Οικονόμη, και εσείς, ο γιατρός υπέγραψες.
Καλημέρα.
Καλημέρα.
Λούλα, τι βλέπω. Ομόρφιος μετά την επέμβαση.
Σου λέει κάτι ιδιαίτερα?
Όχι καθόλου.
Να σας γνωρίσω τον Τζαφάρ. Είναι ο δότης μειονότερος στο Μητουνάν.
Chapter tonight from Ibram Kendi's book is biology. And I thought this was a perfect way to begin. Let's put a few more lights on. He recounts personal stories each chapter, and I don't always regale you of those. A tiny, quiet girl, tinier and quieter than me, sat on the other side of the back of the room. And the teacher asked a question, and I saw her slowly raise her dark-skinned hand, which was a rare occurrence. Her shyness, or something else, generally kept her mouth closed and her arm down. But something roused her today, and I smiled as I saw her small hand rising for the teacher's attention. The teacher looked at her, looked away, and instead called on a white hand as soon as it was raised. As the black girl's arm came down, I could see her head going down. As I saw her head going down, I could see her spirits going down. I turned and looked up at the teacher, who, of course, was not looking at me. She was too busy engaging a favored white child to notice what was happening in the back row. Neither my fury nor the sadness of the girl registered for her. I think any of you who've probably been in school, then not the child who always answered correctly, knew that there were favored individuals in the room. And I remember that when I was in Latin school and getting ready to go to seminary to study. And very interesting things happen in the dynamics of all that. After we read this, page 45, biological racism rests on two ideas. The races are meaningfully different in their biology, and these differences create a hierarchy of value. Ibram Kendi grew up believing all human beings descend from Adam and Eve. It conflicted with the secular creed he had been taught, the American creation story that all men are created equal. Remember, he's always putting in the historical here. Biological racial difference is one of those widely held racist beliefs that few people realize they hold. Nor do they realize that those beliefs are rooted in racist ideas. He grew up hearing about how black people had more natural physical ability. I think any of us certainly know that. How one drop of Negro blood makes a Negro and put out the light of intelligence and of intellect. This is from Thomas Dixon and Leopard Spots from 1902. How black people have natural gifts of improvisation excelling in fields of jazz, rap, and basketball, and not in other fields like classical music. Now, I could always encourage you, and I want you to know, you may just think, oh God, I have to watch a movie. I would just advise you to see The Green Book. If you've never seen The Green Book, you will have laughter, you will have sentiment, you will have power, you will have it is a guy movie and a chick flick, as we say. It's just one of those things, but it is a very powerful story about a classical pianist, but he's really a jazz pianist, and he decides he's going to go on tour in the Deep South. And he gets one of my Goombas, one of my Italian relatives, to be his driver.
Did you mention he's black? Did you mention he was black?
Oh, I did not say that, did I? A black pianist, okay, critical, and an Italian white driver, which sets up the whole thing, and that's all we'll say. Leave it up to you. Physical characteristics, female and male. 1903, in an issue of Medicine, the increase of rape of white women stems from large size of the Negro's penis, their birthright of sexual madness and excess. Now, in this whole thing of the male and female, is saying that black women will always have generous buttocks, and black men will always be well endowed sexually. So we have monogenesis versus polygenesis. Darwin, that each species has been independently created is erroneously. But as I mentioned here, the problem came with the selection, the natural selection. So the naturally selected white race was winning the struggle, was evolving, heading toward perfection according to social Darwinists. Three outcomes available for the weaker races: extinction, slavery, or assimilation. Albion Small in 1894. Many fear the first possibility for the Indians. The second fate is often predicted for the Negroes, while the third is anticipated for the Chinese and other Eastern peoples. So you always get an historic setting in what he writes. And of course, he's dealing with biology here. Global outrage for the genocidal, eugenics-driven politics of Nazi Germany in the mid-20th century led to the marginalization of biological racism within academic thought for the first time in 400 years. Biological racism, curse theory, polygenesis, and eugenics had held strong for that long. Now, the curse theory, of course, you have the Adam and Eve story, and he talks about Noah. Noah gets drunk, and he falls asleep, and he's naked. And the discretion, but he is viewed by one of his sons. And that representation is that Shem would overtake Ham's territory because he was cursed for having looked on his father's nakedness. All of this sounds so foreign for us because we don't often open up our Bibles and look for its historical indications of what's going on. But in it, all of it is the history that brings the curse, and the curse goes to the black community. Let's move on. Clinton, in 2000, had two screens in the East Room: Decoding the Book of Life, and the second one, A Milestone for Humanity. Geneticists had started encoding the Book of Life in 1990, and Clinton said Thomas Jefferson spread out a magnificent map of the continental United States in this room, on this floor, in the East Room. Today, the world is joining us here in the East Room to behold a map of even greater significance. We are here to celebrate the completion of the first theory of the entire human genome. Without a doubt, this is the most important, most wondrous map ever produced by humankind. When scientists finished drawing the map of our miraculous genetic code, when they stepped back and looked at the map, one of the great truths they saw was that in genetic terms, all human beings, regardless of race, are more than 99.9% the same. Clinton declared, what that means is that modern science has confirmed what we first learned from ancient faiths. The most important fact of life on this earth is our common humanity. course, remember, it's always going to be somebody who's going to comment, well, wait a minute. It's more than 99.9, but there's a fraction there, and what is it? So after Clinton's announcement, on the backside of the page, the science writer Nicholas Wade, in a 2014 bestseller, The Troublesome Inheritance, he makes a case that there's a genetic component to the human social behavior. This connecting of biology is the cradle of biological racism. It leads to biological ranking of the races and the supposition that biology of certain races yields superior behavioral traits like intelligence. And we've been dealing with this for weeks because his book, as always, has this continuum of information that is based on this kind of a thing, where people look to it and you're saying, well, what is the black community good for? Well, just watch Sunday night football, and then see most of the players on the field. But what it does is that it is certainly limiting of a white community, if it isn't all the other races, and he gets to all of this going on. No racial ancestry, ethnic ancestry does exist. So people are born with ancestry that comes from their parents, but are assigned a race. And you remember that every time you fill out one of these questionnaires, it has a little fill-in, white or Caucasian, black, Asian, and all of a sudden you're put into a category. Certainly, each of us have gone through different experiences about that, but we can take it very naturally. People from the same ethnic groups that are native to certain geographic regions typically share the same genetic profile. Geneticists call them populations. Comparing ethnic populations, they find there is more genetic diversity between populations within Africa than between Africa and the rest of the world. Ethnic groups in West Africa are more genetically similar to ethnic groups in Western Europe than to the ethnic groups in Eastern Africa. And then he says, race, and we had this last time, race is a genetic mirage. Christian fundamentalists, Ken Ham, and certainly we've done a job on the churches in these last weeks, because remember, he was raised in a very strong black Christian church, and he's always doing a job. But in this particular case, this Christian fundamentalist, a co-author of One Race, One Blood, for one, point out the common ground of both evolutionists and creationists. The mapping of the human genome concluded that there is only one race, the human race. And always keep in mind, creationists are people who believe in the fundamental interpretation that in the scripture, it happened just the way it's written. So I would only challenge you that you have a Bible at home. It can be an old Bible or it can be a relatively new one. And go back, and the first story is really the second story if you look chronologically and historically. And that's the one we're all used to. And I always call it, on the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. So what happened on the first day of creation? Well, God, let there be light. So it was the power of the Word of God, and each one, let there be, let there be. But we always have a repeating refrain. The repeating refrain is, and God found it very good. And when he gets to the end, he found it very good. Then you get to chapter 2, but it isn't clearly chapter 2. Remember, the Germans did this. They're very organized people. So the Germans put it in this order. So there's an overlap between chapter 1 and chapter 2, and chapter 2 is the oldest story. And that is, God takes the clay of the earth, and he forms the human person, the man, and breathes into his nostrils the breath of life. And from the side he takes the ribs. So you get all those stories. Now that's creationism. And you know that there are many, many organizations, churches, groups in the country who believe that's just the way it happened. And Hubble telescope, all the rest of the things that we refer to scientifically, that's not true. The Bible's written as is, and that's the truth. Okay? So that's where you get this Ken Ham pointing out something that is really quite radical on the level of contemporary science. I'm in the middle of the page. There are singular race makers. The unfortunate truth is that their well-meaning post-racial strategy makes no sense in our racist world. Race is a mirage but one that has organized itself around in very real ways. Imagining the existence of races in a racist world is as conserving and harmful as imagining away classes in a capitalistic world. It allows the ruling races and classes to keep on ruling. So all of this kind of a thing, when you think about what happens, he says, basically saying to us, don't be naive. You're living in a racist world. And you can't be in La La Land. This is not like the movie. Remember that one Hollywood? There it was. Okay. There's a concept in assimilation that if we stop talking about it, it miraculously goes away. But if we stop using racial categories, thank you very much. You never call me, but you call me now. Okay. We're talking about trying to get hold of people for a month sometimes. Okay, if we stop using racial categories, then we'll not be able to identify racial inequity. If we cannot identify racial inequity, then we'll not be able to identify racist policies. If we cannot identify racist policies, then we cannot challenge racist policies. If we cannot challenge racist policies, then racist power's final solution will be achieved, a world of inequity none of us can see, let alone resist. Terminating racist categories is potentially the last, not the first, in the step of the anti-racist struggle. And that's all. Very important. It's like being realistic about all this. To be an anti-racist is to recognize the reality of biological equity. That skin color is as meaningless to our underlying humanity as the clothes over the skin. Of course, now we're dealing in this little clip that we saw, this visual thing and the statement on racism, that we're not aware of what's going on. But here you have a fellow who's from the Muslim community. And I have to tell you, there are always tensions. There's tensions in every country. So you deal in France, I'll give you an example. In Paris, when I was in school there in 76 and 77, there was a great influx for people from Algeria and Morocco. And when I went, I had been in Newport, Rhode Island for the summer. Well, I love the sun. And I used to study French on the rocks in Newport. And I went to Paris, quite tan. And then we had to have an identity card and a student card. And you had to prove you had enough money so you wouldn't be a drain on the French economy. And as soon as the gendarme saw me, they put me in a line with all the people from Morocco and Algeria. It took 8 hours in line to get up to the table, and this Parisian woman looked at me and said, "Vous êtes Américain? You're an American. You'll have to come back tomorrow and get your identity card."
Gary, you assumed he was Muslim. How do you know that? He could have been Syrian Christian. He could
Yes.
have been an Iranian
Yeah.
Baha'i.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Whatever. Whatever it was, you have the normal response of the community who won't sit next to him. I mean, the husband could have sat next to him, but does not.
Each understand.
Yeah, I mean, remember, that's the whole point of the whole thing. Okay. To be an anti-racist is to recognize there's no such thing as white blood or black diseases or natural Latinx athleticism. And by the way, the Latin community, according to the election results, do not like to be called Latinx. They want to be Latinos or Latinos. That's for our own information. To be anti-racist is to also recognize the living, breathing reality of this racial mirage, which makes our skin colors more meaningful than our individuality. To be anti-racist is to focus on ending the racism that shoes. That's my own comment. I'll find the word later. The mirages, that shows the mirages, not ignores the mirages that shape people's lives. So that gives us the biology chapter. So we get to the business at hand. Onward and upward, Michael.
Just ask a question on your presentation here. In simple terms, one would argue if you got rid of racism, you get rid of inequity. But the converse is if you get rid of inequity, you get rid of racism.
The paradox, huh? Yeah.
Well, racism exists for a purpose of creating inequity. So the business of a hand, next on the agenda is the focus group report. And I think we have representation from most of them here tonight. So Adrian,
Yeah,
kick it off.
Michael and I just met with some people from CABA. So it was the first meeting, we had a prep meeting the last time before the last time we met. But this talked about more of, what the expectations are. And so everybody just shared who was on the call, which wasn't very many people. We did a Zoom call. And there was should I give the feedback for the, yeah, okay, so, one of the individuals talked about how they were very, pleased with how things work when the village has special events or, festivals, et cetera. That it's nice to have local police and they're very responsive and, a couple other people asked if there could be some attention, not during Christmas time, but other times of the year to parking in the village and parking enforcement. Another comment was, hold on a sec, sorry. Okay. They would like to see, when the police are working, to see them on the street. They'd like to see them more in person than just in the car. I think is that it?
In my mental checklist, one comment is that they haven't experienced the door check in many years. They think that it's not happening.
Yeah, so that was a question,
Yeah.
whether that was happening because they weren't clear that was happening.
And they mentioned that none of them had experienced any interaction with the police in a very long time. I mean, one person said that the most recent experience he had is at 3 o'clock in the morning, he got a parking ticket for parking in front of his own driveway. But they were just saying that their perception of the police is traffic patrol at the entrances to the village, period.
What
With
is the door
exception-
check?
with ex- huh?
What is the door check?
Well, for a good number of years, a regular detail would go around in the night and make certain that all the doors were locked.
For businesses.
So let's say that somebody last one out forgot to lock the door. That would be picked up. But again, the one thing was special events. There was a lot of satisfaction with that. But otherwise, they felt that there was basically no type of interaction, basically. But they are going to proceed to back up a little bit. Because of COVID and because of the spike in COVID, I don't know if everybody's aware, but in Columbia County, there have been 39 new cases in the past 3 days. And so they're going to be a little bit scaled back with people coming out. So they are, as a foursome right now, going to go out and collect more anecdotal information, talking to people, talking to the other businesses. And they're savvy enough, all of them, not to taint this in any way, to don't ask loaded questions, just like, let's talk about what are your needs, what are your experiences, what are your priorities. And they hope to get some feedback that way. So they're having a difficult time getting people to come in, but they think that they can go talk to people. And I think that we're going to hear something similar when we hear from the seniors group, that that's an approach they're taking. But they're upbeat, they're determined.
Yeah, no, and they're considering, well, everybody's busy, but because running retail and everything in restaurant is very stressful. And they're dealing with all sorts of other things right now with COVID. But they're happy to go forward and so they're just gonna, reach out to their fellow business owners and, ask the same questions that everybody's, what everybody wants everybody to comment on, so without restriction, so let people, people can be honest and in whatever way they wanna be, so.
Now, the co-facilitators of this group are Tom Crowell from Chatham Brewery and Melanie Spock, but then also Mike Blazel is becoming very involved. So I think they know a lot of people in the community.
Do you have a list of the questions that you're asking anywhere, or that you've given them to ask? Are we kind of trying to do some sort of uniformity in the questions that we're asking?
I don't think there is questions that they're asking. They're saying, what are your needs, what are your experiences? What do you think?
Those are questions. What are your needs, what are your?
Yeah, the only thing that we've loaded up, it comes directly out of the handbook, or the workbook, is that we're supposed to report on deployment, policy, needs, experience.
Right,
So
and
they're
so only
sticking pretty much to the needs
but
and experience.
the groups are not gonna they have nothing to do with the deployment aspect of it.
No.
So it's just your experiences, your needs.
Well, some of the
Or
deployment
maybe-
comes back out, when they report back on needs, for example, this group, they feel that if there is gonna be a police department, that there is a need to have police on the streets during the day talking to people, whether it be visitors or residents or whoever that are coming and going. They just felt that that was a need. Did they go to other municipalities? Now, quite often they're on vacation, so they're going to a tourist town, right? And at a tourist town, you'll often come across a police officer who's on the street engaging with the tourist. A little bit different experience, I think, when you go to Whitehall or Chatham or places like that. But that's, again, they're expressing a need that addresses itself in the form of deployment. But they're not talking about deployment.
I'm just gonna say, I've been here 15 years, and the only person I can really say that I would recognize is Peter Faulkner. Okay, I hear you say 2% Afro-American. I've never seen, maybe I saw one man one time. And I'm talking 15 years, I don't know how long he's been here, maybe he's only been here the last 6 months. But I've not seen anybody, I see a couple of cars moving about now and then, but I couldn't say I recognize anybody. I don't see them.
Well, I will say though, when Chief Bone was the chief, we saw him everywhere.
Yeah,
You still see him
okay, yeah, I
everywhere.
knew who he was. I
But
knew who he
yeah,
was.
that's important to mention, I think.
I knew who he was, but I'm talking about the reality right now, I'm saying, I don't.
Things have changed. I remember coming here and seeing, and
Yeah, I knew who he
people
was, and I knew who his brother was,
Things have
his mayor
changed.
was.
The financial thing that.
Well, again, there used to be 5 full-time police officers, including a full-time chief, and a $600,000 police budget, so.
When was that?
2011.
Yeah, they had it.
Like 2013, they trimmed it to closer to 350.
There weren't 5 full-time police officers then, but whatever your
I
statistics.
think 2010, 11, that was the size.
Anyway, I have a graph of the costs that were passed out. The reduction of the cost and the increase
But
in
to stay on the
savings.
focus of our, we'll have a discussion section, so again, I'm just being taskmaster here, we're going through the reports for the focus groups.
Yeah.
They're meeting, they believe they can keep to a tight timeline and produce a product. So but this is their first,
They definitely said they'd get something.
this is
for the
their
hall,
first,
by the, mid-December, I think.
this is their first meeting to accomplish something. And they assign themselves tasks and they're going to go out and do it, so. Good report from them, I'd say.
Yeah, that was good.
So next, who's here from seniors? Pete? Pete, Tom, yeah. Seniors.
We're reviewing information we gathered from a number of seniors in the village. And looking at this, we didn't go outside the village. Most of our meetings were done, some were done via email. I was meeting with people on my front porch, and basically anybody that looked old that walked in front of my house, I asked them if they would stop and talk to me.
I guess I didn't reply.
Some said no, some said yes, and they did. So primarily, we're reviewing that information, and that's really all I can say at this point. We discussed it tonight. We'll probably be discussing it via email, and we're gonna meet one more time and put together, I guess you could say, a presentation. And that will be our 3 working meetings.
I'll just add to that, and I don't wanna speak for the group, but, some of the things that have come up were exactly what, the CABA group has, commented on, just that they would like to see more, like a community policing presence. That's fairly correct, right? With
No, you're
some of the,
absolutely correct.
without getting into the specific comments, so, and everything that was brought up really is not something that will cost the village